everyone. My name is Gunnar Newton, and today I will be talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, or what is commonly known as PTSD. The topics we will be going over are: what is PTSD, what are the criteria, the changes in the DSM, and any relevant information. Let's begin! Post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental disorder that derives from a traumatic, life-threatening experience. These experiences can include, but not limited to, natural disasters, accidental and intentional human disasters like sexual assault, child abuse, and car crashes. Now that we know what PTSD is, let's begin to talk about the criteria that an individual has to meet in order to be diagnosed with this mental disorder. The following criteria applies to adults, adolescents, and children older than 6 years old. Criterion A is the traumatic experience. There are many specific ways an individual can experience a traumatic event. The first being a direct experience, meaning that the individual is part of the traumatic event, like a car accident or getting sexually assaulted. The second is being a witness to an event. This means that you have just watched a traumatic event occur in front of you. The third is learning that a family member or close friend just went through a traumatic event. A good example for this is hearing that your brother has just been brutally jumped while walking home at night. The last way to experience a traumatic event is repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of a traumatic event. Examples for this are police officers repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse or first responders consistently collecting human remains. Criterion A4 does not apply to social media, television, movies, or pictures unless it is work-related. Criterion B is intrusion, and a person must show at least one or more of the following symptoms to meet this criterion. This can be from intrusive memories of the traumatic event to intrusive dreams and nightmares of the event. Criterion B also has dissociative reactions, which refer to flashbacks. Flashbacks are when an individual feels or acts as if the traumatic event is reoccurring. These flashbacks are on a spectrum from mild to extreme. Criterion B has to deal with being mentally distressed at the exposure towards either internal or external cue that could symbolize a portion of a traumatic event, while B5 deals with the physical reaction towards one of those cues. These cues would differ from person to person. For example, a war veteran who suffers from PTSD on the night of 4th of July has a high chance of showing both intense psychological and physiological distress. It is good to note that in children, B1, repetitive play may occur that may resemble the theme or aspect of their traumatic event. Also, their dreams may be frightening without any recognizable content. Criterion C is avoidance. This criterion is for those individuals who try to avoid one or both internal and external reminders. These reminders include distressing memories, thoughts, feelings, people, places, activities, conversations, objects that could be closely related to their past trauma. Criterion D deals with negative alterations in cognition and mood associated with the traumatic event. This means an individual could have trouble remembering pieces of the event or could blame himself or herself because of distorted thoughts about the cause of the event. Also, an individual could start believing the worst of people and the world around him or her. Furthermore, a person who suffers from PTSD could also have persistent negative emotions like fear, anger, guilt, or shame. Criterion D also deals with an individual's lack of interest and participation in activities they would normally enjoy. In addition, a person could feel alienated and estranged from others. Lastly, a person with PTSD might not be able to feel any positive emotions like happiness or satisfaction. A person must meet 2 or more of these symptoms to move on to the next criterion. Criterion E is based off of alterations in arousal and an individual's behavioral reactivity. A person must meet 2 or more of the following symptoms: angry outburst with little to none provocation and reckless or self-destructive behavior. In addition, criteria E covers an individual who is extremely or abnormally alert or has an exaggerated startle response. Furthermore, a person who cannot concentrate or has trouble with sleep would also fall under this criterion. The last couple of criteria are not associated with any type of symptom. but instead deals with the duration of symptoms, the significance of the symptoms, and to distinguish that these symptoms are not the cause of substance or another medical condition. Those are the criteria in which a person must meet in order to be diagnosed with PTSD. The next thing I would like to discuss are the changes that PTSD underwent during the transition from the DSM-4 to the DSM-5. Post-traumatic stress disorder went through an array of changes. One of the largest changes in the DSM-4 to the DSM-5 is the location of this disorder. Before the DSM-5 was published, PTSD was found in the anxiety disorder diagnostic category, but the DSM-5 has placed it under the trauma and stress-related section. Trauma and stress-related disorder is a new chapter in the DSM. The reason for this change is because all disorders under this section are revolved around an individual's symptoms beginning or worsening because of an adverse event. Another change is the amount of symptoms PTSD requires. As you can see, the DSM-4 only had 3 different criteria sections: re-experience, avoidance and numbing, and arousal, while the DSM-5 has 4. This is because the authors wanted more of an emphasis on changes in self and mood that begins to worsen since the traumatic event. Criterion A is now more specific as to what qualifies as a traumatic event. This is due to them removing subjective reaction, which was A2 in the DSM-4. Criterion D has most of the numbing symptoms like D7. This criterion also has a new symptom like D3. Criterion E has new symptoms when compared to Criterion D in the DSM-4. One of the new symptoms is E2, which focuses on behavioral reactivity and arousal. Lastly, the DSM-5 version of PTSD is now developmentally sensitive to preschool children. This is largely due to Dr. Shringa and his colleagues. In 2011, Dr. Shringa and his colleagues showed that children 6 years old and younger who have been through a traumatic event showed many symptoms of impairment that were similar to PTSD in adults. However, these children did not meet the criteria from the DSM-4. To be specific, 3 out of the 4 raters did not diagnose any of the 12 cases with PTSD. This showed that the DSM-4 was not sensitive enough to diagnose PTSD in severely traumatized infants. In contrast, all 4 raters were able to diagnose more cases with alternative criteria. This led to the DSM-5 to have a separate criteria list for children the age of 6 years old or younger. Due to time constraints, I will briefly go over the criteria for children 6 years old and younger. According to the DSM-5, there are only 3 ways for these kids to experience a traumatic event: directly, witnessing it in person, or learning that a traumatic event has happened to a parent or guardian. Criterion B is the same as the adult's criterion. A child would need to show 1 or more of the 5 symptoms that are included in this criterion. Criterion C has both avoidance and negative alterations. A child would need to show signs of 1 or more of the following symptoms: avoidance, or efforts to avoid activities, places, or physical reminders, or avoidance or efforts to avoid people, conversations, or interpersonal situations that could bring up reminders of the traumatic experience. Also, a child could show signs of increased negative emotional states, diminished interest to participate in activities, could be socially withdrawn, and could have a significant reduction in expression of positive emotions. Criterion D needs at least 2 of the 5 symptoms. Those symptoms include angry outbursts like extreme temper tantrums towards people or objects, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, problems with concentration, and sleep disturbance. The duration of these symptoms must be going on for more than a month, must cause significant distress or impairment in relationships with parents, siblings, or other caregivers, and finally, the disturbance shall not come from effects of substances like medication, nor should it be from another medical condition. When the DSM-5 was published in 2013, critics of the PTSD checklist, PCL-5, questioned if the change was going to affect the association with comorbid conditions. But in 2021, a study by Cynthia Erdman and her colleagues compared the DSM-4 checklist with the new DSM-5 checklist to see how closely related the two were when assessing individuals for having PTSD. The study consisted of 1,921 active duty and veteran personnel. The results showed significant similar outcomes, and the PCLC was able to effectively estimate the PCL5 sum scores and PTS prevalence based on the DCM5 criteria and vice versa. These results are important because they show strong support for the transition from the PCLC to the PCL5 without losing the ability to monitor trends and associated comorbidities over time. As you can see, there was a substantial amount of changes in the DSM. Now let's jump into our final topic, relevant information. Some facts that I found interesting while researching post-traumatic stress disorder is that this disorder is more commonly found in females, and they tend to suffer from this disorder for longer periods of time. Also, about half of the adult population with PTSD recover completely after 3 months. Some similar disorders that a psychologist may have to differentiate with are adjustment disorder, acute stress disorder, TBI, anxiety disorder, and OCD. Lastly, 80% of individuals with PTSD have symptoms of another mental disorder. Males are more likely to suffer from substance abuse and conduct disorder. And finally, individuals deployed into recent wars have a 48% chance to suffer from mild TBI. I hope that this information has been beneficial for you. Thank you for your time and listening to my breakdown of post-traumatic stress disorder.